Thank you for making the trip north today. You're going to kind of speak up to this presentation. I just opened this up. Just kind of stay with you here. I'm guessing we're going to have a couple more ice cream eaters straggling in here. But if we record our hearing, so if you want to introduce yourself for the record, and you can take it away from there.
Sure. My name is Tommy Vitolo. I'm a senior associate at Synapse Energy Economics, located in Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I perform analysis and provide expert testimony before utility commissions and state and local governments. I hold a PhD in systems engineering, a master's in financial and industrial mathematics, and bachelor's degrees in applied mathematics, computer science, and economics. Just drag this guy.
It's a touch screen.
Ooh, fancy. Yeah. There you go. It's a little bit about Synapse anyway.
Didn't you say computer science?
Yeah, but in the Massachusetts legislature, like we are not this advanced, I can assure you. I also do serve as a state representative in the Massachusetts House of Representatives, representing the 15th Norfolk District, a district that includes the childhood home of Lieutenant Governor Zuckerman.
When you said Lieutenant Governor, I thought you were talking about your lieutenant.
Yeah, no, I wasn't. And so thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm here to provide some context, both technical and policy-oriented, around net metering. My technical and political opinion is that net metering is an appropriate, indeed preferred policy mechanism to allow Vermont to meet its climate and comprehensive energy plan goals in a timely and culturally appropriate manner, and I thank you for allowing me to explain further. There are complex energy policies, procedures, methodologies, and markets. Okay, I'm sorry. Again, our technology, it's very loud.
In fact, it will. You don't actually have to speak into it. You can just talk.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. So there are complex energy policies, procedures, methodologies, and markets designed for professional engineers and financiers to squeeze every basis point possible, but net metering is not one of them. Net metering is designed for your neighbors who want to participate in solar. Perhaps they're interested in controlling their future electric bills. Perhaps they're interested in a form of retail choice not otherwise available in Vermont. Perhaps they're interested in taking a direct, specific action to reduce the carbon footprint of their household. Perhaps all three. Net metering is popular across the country because it's simple to understand. You pay a simple rate to the electric company and you receive a simple rate back. And the simplicity is essential for regular folks and regular small business folks to pencil out whether or not the finances work for them. There's been quite a bit of discussion about cost shifting across the country, Vermont included. And a common tactic of utilities is to be gravely concerned that non-participant customers are cross-subsidizing those with solar PV. My colleague and I analyzed this very concern for the NEM 2.0 in Vermont in a report from March of last year. And our report was included in the Public Utility Commission hearing on the matter, case number 18-0086-INV. And that proceeding was not an evidentiary proceeding where testimony and exhibits are provided and witness statements and calculations questioned under oath. Essentially, position statements were filed and ultimately no quantitative analysis was put forward on the costs and benefits of net metering except the analysis that Synapse performed put forward by Renewable Energy Vermont. Had the proceeding been conducted as an evidentiary proceeding, I would have had the opportunity to respond to PUC questions and possibly avoid the situation where the PUC misunderstood the information and analysis provided by Synapse. What we found, and stand by, is that the cost shift associated with net energy metering 2.0, the rates from last year, amounted to about 10 cents for a residential customer per month. Total bill impact of the cost shift for a residential customer, about 10 cents a month. And as you can see, it drifts downward. The 25-year average is actually 4 cents. But in the near term, it peaks out at about a dime. In comparison to net energy metering 1.0, you can see the the gray bars are the combined of NEM 1.0 and 2.0. The little tiny blue bars are NEM 2.0. And so when Vermont transitioned from NEM 1.0 to 2.0, it dramatically reduced the cost shifting. It used to be upwards of $1.50, or even actually for just 1.0, upwards of $2. Combined, it's down to about $1.50, but the NEM 2.0 contribution to that is pennies.
So I just want to I have a question about that, and I'd like to bookmark it. I don't want to
Sure.
interrupt you.
Sure.
So we can come back to it.
And so when I think about Vermont, I think about a population distributed across the state in harmony with the natural environment. And as an outside observer, it appears that the Vermont way has been stamped on Vermont's net energy metering program. Small, locally owned and operated residential PV is a higher value. Similarly, small commercial scale gets that higher value. Moderate-sized operations are acceptable, particularly if installed on land already scarred by a heavy-handed use. And the largest uses in net energy metering remain rather small when compared to industrial-scale solar operations built by utilities or by third-party investors in Vermont. Vermont does general stores and bed and breakfasts, not so much Walmarts and high-rise hotels. As a legislator, I'm keenly aware of the tension in advocating for my district and for my state and for my values broadly. And so I look for policy approaches that make significant progress toward the policy objectives at minimal negative consequences to folks in the district and statewide, particularly those residents who are more vulnerable, on whom negative consequences will weigh heavily. And so as a policy, I believe net metering aligns with Vermont's values, sensitive to the landscape, consistent with the know-how, self-reliance, and individual and community enterprise commonly found in New England states. The installations are owned by community members, or indeed, in the case of municipal installations, by entire communities. Vermont tailored the program to align with in-state values around size and placement, and to foster deployment throughout the state. It's got a built-in mechanism to adjust pricing, which reduces quantity and price risk, and allows for a brisk deployment pace necessary for Vermont to meet its climate goals and its comprehensive energy plan needs. It provides customers with energy choice and isn't a burden on non-participants. It doesn't require the electric company or government to put up the capital necessary to build the PV, and it maintains a popular program enabled by the legislature. So I think the questions could go in a lot of different directions, and I, being new to this committee, don't have a great feel for where your specific interests are or where you want to go. So I think the best bet is to go back to your bookmark maybe, but
Sure.
Have a conversation.
Yeah. Of the 8 of us around the table, 6 of us are new to this committee as well. So the fourth slide that you had, if you could pull that up again, yeah, that one right there. Just to understand what that is telling us. So the turquoise bars are simply a reflection of the prior.
Yeah, the turquoise bars are these bars on a different scale.
Yeah, and so the gray bars represent pricing that net metering contracts were being entered into 10 years ago.
Right, so the gray is, as of the date of this publication, so
Yeah.
I think March 2018, the combined bill impact of the original iteration of NEM, what's called NEM 1.0,
Mhm.
and NEM 2.0, as compared to just the impacts from NEM 2.0. So you can see the vast majority of the impact is grandfathered NEM 1.0 installations when PV was more expensive and the policy, perhaps because of that, was more generous. When NEM 2.0 rates came out, the NEM 2.0 rates were lower. So participants were not given as generous a deal, and as a result, the impact on non-participating customers for those participants is much, much lower.
And so what is the assumption, if you could flip back to the prior page, maybe we'll get more directly to it. What is the assumption in terms of the adoption rate and kind of how much net metering is kind of picked up through this 25-year
Sure.
process? Or does this assume there's a certain amount of net metering that comes out in 2017 and, I don't know, standard growth rate throughout that 25-year period?
So I'm pulling out and we've made available, this is the report that the
Yep,
chart comes
I've
from.
got it right here.
Yeah. I may have to get back to you on the deployment.
Yeah, and I guess the way I'm thinking about it over time is that, as rates came down for net metering purchases with net metering 2.0, that those rates are flat for a period of time.
My sense is that the reason why why the impact is reduced is that the alternative, the cost of power outside of that continues to go up, right? So the rates for the NEM are locked in, but the alternative, the general supply rates are not. They'll go up over time. And so over time, the comparison of the two eventually tilts favorable toward the NEM. Does that make sense?
I'm sure it makes sense. I'm not sure I understand it.
So in 2019,
Yep.
the amount the utility is paying for the NEM customer
Yep.
is just slightly higher than the cost of running the utility, sort of kilowatt hours one at a time. But over time, the utilities costs continue to go up, right? The cost of procure power goes up over time. Gas prices are incredibly low now. That's not forecast to stay that way forever, for example. And so over time, as the wholesale energy prices go up and other utility costs go up, relative to the price they've locked in for the NEM, they start to flip. And that's why you see over time, these costs go down. The NEM costs are roughly the same. The gas price continues to go upward ahead of inflation, and so the wholesale price for energy grows faster than inflation, and that's the alternative. That's what is influencing. Even if the company isn't using natural gas directly, it's natural gas that's setting the wholesale energy market price, and so the 25-year forecast for natural gas price going upward is going to drive that shift.
Okay.
But I understood that the incentive for the participant in that metering, for the homeowner, was an adder on top of retail. So what is fixed is that adder, not the retail price. So I was looking at your report on page 3, and I wrote a question down. You had said that, or the report says that GMP offered customers 20 cents per kilowatt hour.
Right. And then
as
1.0?
in 1.0. But actually, what my understanding was, and you said approximately 6 cents more than retail, my understanding is that, and in fact, in many community solar field,
Right.
where I signed a contract for this, that it's the 6 cents that is fixed, not the 20 cents per kilowatt hour. So I'm getting paid 6 cents above retail, whatever retail is. And my understanding about NEM 2.0 is it's the same thing. It's just a lower number.
For how long are you paid that 6 cents? Is it the full
10
lifetime?
10 years.
10 years. Right. So that gets you to
Right.
there.
Right. No, I got
Okay.
that. But what I'm asking you is whether my understanding is correct about how this is set up, how the economics are set up for the customer, and if so, if that's not at variance with your analysis here. So again, my understanding is that the sweetener for the customer is a fixed price adder. cents per
Relative
cent.
to the average, right?
No, it's a fixed price adder, fixed pennies per kilowatt hour adder to the retail rate, whatever the retail rate is,
To the average retail rate across the state.
to the customer's
Yeah,
retail.
it floats with the retail rate.
But it's
With
but is
the
it-
for the customer's retail rate.
The adder's on top of the retail rate. But the retail rate will change. And the customer.
Right, I mean, in a sense, it-
stays.
So I think that's correct. It doesn't matter if it's the statewide average or the local average, that it's still going to float in the same direction. No, I think that is right. That does sound right.
So I'm not understanding how it can get to be a negative impact on the non-participants' residential building, which I think is what this graph is intended to show.
So, again, not that I understand this, but as I'm interpreting it, this looks at the relative, this is a relative measure, that net metered power 20 years into the future, 25 years into the future, on a relative basis, is going to be less expensive. Still, the utility clearly is still spending a very positive amount for that.
So
But is this saying that it's cheaper than?
the utility pays you 10 years for the RECs. My recollection, and it may depend on which installations, that the utility continues to collect the RECs indefinitely,
Ah, okay.
and those
Recs.
RECs have
Okay,
a value.
Okay, it's the recs
Right.
that makes it.
So if the utility continues to collect the RECs and therefore avoids buying them elsewhere and isn't paying the customer after 10 years, then that
Right.
puts
okay.
pressure in the other direction.
Okay. So that answers my question. Good. So because after 10 years, I'm just getting paid retail for
But-
every kilowatt hour. I
But the
have.
utility continues to collect those
But the-
RECs
but-
and uses them for compliance.
Right.
And otherwise, they'd have to pay a compliance payment or buy them off the market.
Right.
So the alternative is saving them money and
Right.
pushing down bill impacts on everyone.
Okay. Yep, I see that.
I'm curious in terms of your calculation of these impacts. Is this an aggregated or average statewide impact, or how did you calculate?
This is actually specific to GMP because that was the data that was readily available.
Okay. Just as a comment, if you didn't include other utilities, then that's at least in a limited way pretty skewed because of the demographics of some of the other utilities and who is in their rate base and who is not. So I think it's just, that's the impact on Green Mountain Power. I'm not disputing that. but
Understood. Yeah.
That's not the impact.
I think it would be worthwhile to puzzle through co-ops and munis as well. It's a little trickier in that they have to, their reporting requirements aren't as significant, and so it's going to be harder to get the information necessary to do the analysis. But it's not impossible.
I think the co-ops can readily provide that information. I'm just saying, in an extremely rural demographic, with virtually no commercial or industrial load, the cost shift is entirely onto other residential customers. And at Green Mountain Power or Burlington Electric Department, that's not the case.
That's right, and it's not clear if we would, my sense is we would see a similar impact, all else being equal, because in fact, industrial customers and large commercial customers, they don't pay a higher rate. In some places, they pay a lower rate, and so the bill impact might be more significant there than residential customers. But it's worth doing the analysis and having a peek. There's no question that the economics of smaller utilities and more rural utilities are different. And the rate making is sometimes different.
So this is a little outside of your presentation here, but I'm curious on a relative basis what the net metering system looks like in Massachusetts. And
We update ours about as often as you all update yours.
okay.
And so my understanding is actually a little bit dated in Massachusetts. We recently put out what's called the SMART program. And it may be trying to do a little bit too much, maybe a little too cute. In Massachusetts, we have full virtual net metering, and that means that in Massachusetts parlance that you can take your kilowatt hours and distribute them, give the kilowatt hour bill credit to another customer in the same service territory. Right, so I'm a National Grid customer. If I put solar on my house and this month I produce more solar than I generate, I can just give it as a percentage or a kilowatt hour to my mother-in-law. this virtual net metering has actually allowed for rather big installations. It's not tied to the meter. It's been especially useful for facilities that have many meters, universities, hospitals. We've even seen it in residential settings where a condominium could own solar on the roof and distribute it to all of their residents. Each of them has a different meter. We have also been sort of trying to squeeze down the subsidy. And the mechanism for our subsidy are SRECs. So we have our class 1 rec most closely matches your, is it called class 2 or tier 2?
Tier 2.
Tier 2. We have a carve out of that for SRECs. We've come away from that program, and now it's actually something a little closer to what Vermont is doing with net metering, where different kinds of installations get different payment mechanisms, right? So it's sort of in Massachusetts, you get a little bonus if you are a municipality or a nonprofit. You get a bonus if you're smaller. You get less of a bonus if you're a larger installation. So it's a similar system. Obviously, our load is much higher, and we've been battling net metering caps, where some utilities have a threshold for the total amount of customers that are able to participate in their service territory as a function of peak load. So we've been bumping into those caps. And as a result, in Massachusetts, actually last year, we had a job loss in the solar industry, despite tremendous appetite, just because the places where people, the communities where people wanted to build solar, by net metering cap standard, it was already built out. And so Massachusetts had sort of a bang-bang problem where the legislature isn't moving quickly enough and is maybe trying to get too fine-tuned, and we run out of room, and then folks realize that it hasn't broken anything, we could have more, but then by the time the legislature acts, there's already been the consequence, and so we've been swinging back and forth. We have a lot of solar by quantity, but in terms of process, we're kind of scurrying around trying to find a stable policy that works.
So you mentioned the if you have excess production, you can give it to anybody in the same service territory.
That's right.
So are your net metering accounts, I don't know what the right word is, annualized, or is it a month? Is it a per? On your, if you have excess generation, can you bank it?
So you can bank it.
Okay.
You can bank it. There may be a annual or sort of every once in a while they've got to just sort of exit out. But because there's virtual net metering, if you had some left over, you just give it to your neighbor. I mean, you wouldn't waste it. Your neighbor gives you a 12-pack of beer, you send them a couple of kilowatt hours. Of course, you cannot sell electricity unless you have a charter, right? In Massachusetts, I'm sure it's similar in Vermont. But neighbors make neighborly arrangements all the time.
Has Massachusetts thought about taking those financial gains and requiring that they be reutilized through energy efficiency or weatherization or whatever?
Whose financial gain?
The individual who's receiving that benefit from the solar project.
So
Rather than giving them to your neighbor, or you could give it to your neighbor, but only in the form of
That's
some sort of
interesting.
weatherization.
I haven't heard anyone propose anything quite like that. I think, the way virtual net metering works at a residential level in practice probably deviates a little bit from the letter of the law, as I mentioned with the 12-pack, right? I mean, technically, that's not legal, right? You can't sell those kilowatt hours. You can give them away, but you can't sell them. And so individuals come up with clever sort of ways to it, and then at a larger level, institutions have very high-paid lawyers who come up with clever, obscure ways to do the same thing and transfer value without running afoul. I think going forward, I could imagine maybe, you can either have you have your $100 of cash or your $130 of energy efficiency, right? I could imagine some sort of a multiplier or something. I haven't heard anyone raise that as an idea.
We just heard that the other day, that's why I was wondering.
Yeah, it's an interesting one.
So does, what's the project size cap for net metering in Massachusetts? With 500 kW.
Yeah, I actually, I know the Vermont limit. I don't remember. I'm sure it's at least a megawatt.
And are
And
those,
it may be more.
I'm assuming those projects would be merchant generators rather than an industry or company or a town.
Yeah, I mean, the financing behind them, I'm sure it's done several different ways. For a large enough company, they might just pay the capital because they've got it. I'm sure much more often it's some sort of a PPA or quasi-PPA partnership.
I mean, where I'm going with this is we hear, the net metering was designed for residential, works beautifully for that, but when it's used as a mechanism for merchant generators, it's the most expensive way for the utility. The impact on the utility is greatest. And I'm just wondering if is that true in Massachusetts? Has there been discussions about limiting size, or is it
And there
just
certainly
wide
is.
open
There
and
certainly
one
is a
better?
size limit, right? It's not unlimited. I think the size limit is bigger in Massachusetts, but in general, the largest customers in Massachusetts are going to be bigger than the largest customers in Vermont. So that in of itself doesn't seem out of the ordinary. And while it's true that on a cents per kilowatt hour, the price for the utility is the highest for net metering, there are also a variety of avoided costs for local generation which aren't realized for a multiple megawatt solar project in a field somewhere, associated with transmission and distribution capital and line losses.
So this question shouldn't be for you, but since
I'm here.
since you're here and you've also kind of characterized net metering costs in a certain way. So in your report, you're characterizing net metering 2.0 costs. So I'm essentially thinking projects that are coming online 2017 or afterwards have a net impact on GMP customers' bills of kind of 8 to 10 cents in the near term, going down in future years. I know there was some back and forth between you and the PUC on some of the conclusions of your study. Does the PUC, and I'm finally getting to the question that I probably should direct to the PUC. Does the PUC have a figure that says, here's the impact of net metering on a customer's monthly bill or annual cost?
So of course I can't speak for the PUC.
No, I know you can't.
In the hearing we had a year ago, the only figures on this particular matter were produced by Synapse.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So I can't say what the PUC says. I would observe that the most recent NEM rates are actually slightly lower than the ones used for this study,
Sure.
but without sort of returning the entire crank,
Yeah.
I won't assert any particular impact
And they're getting lower again in 3 months.
for some classes.
Yep. That's right. Okay. Any other questions for Thomas?
I'm wondering if Massachusetts has other programs besides that, like Vermont on standard offer.
So by federal law, we can have PERPA projects. That's goes back to 1978. For solar in particular, we have some projects that predate net metering that have grandfather have a different system, and the state itself has deployed solar. So along the Mass Pike, Interstate 90, it's just running right along the side of the road. We've got some solar and we've done some things like that. But those are not broad programs. Those are more narrowly tailored.
And the cost to Massachusetts bill payers for an analysis like this for Massachusetts blueberries?
Well, it's more reminiscent of this one, right? Like Vermont, Massachusetts has legacy solar agreements when the industry was newer, when states like Vermont and Massachusetts were real leaders nationally, dragging folks kicking and screaming to recognize that we need to get started on this. And so Massachusetts has some expensive older projects kicking around. The flip side to that is we just procured some offshore wind at an incredibly, it's not built yet, right? But at a really low price that will actually help lower average customer costs, irrespective of the REC requirement and obligation. So it's, maybe we've turned that corner, but there's still so much solar to build for Massachusetts to be consistent with its 80% reduction by 2050. We may come to the point where it feels like it's getting expensive again because we really do need so much of it to comply with our own already established laws, goals, and requirements. We're not there yet, though. It sort of seems like now, despite the Trump administration's added cost to solar and the phase out of the ITC, right now things are cheap for solar. And so my hope is we get as much of it as we can while it is cheap.
So Massachusetts has chosen to put some along the roadsides?
We have. It's on the one hand, it seems really intuitive, right? You've got just acres and acres and acres. And in Massachusetts, that highway runs through suburban areas almost across the first half of the state. So there's off-takers right there. There isn't a need for a substantial transmission, which might be different than Vermont. When we first installed them, in true Massachusetts style, right? They were installed on a Friday. They were gone Monday morning because nobody put a fence around them, and people rolled up with pickup trucks and took them home. That was embarrassing. But that happened. Now they have fences and cameras. No, it was right on the side of the road. It was right there.
Let's hear from me. What are you gonna do?
You've got a getaway and everything. But we got them on a toll. We tolled them. It's a toll road, so at least we got the toll. So we've done some of that, but it actually is not as. You can't put it too close to the road.
Right.
So it sort of plays out in sort of small clearings near the road, especially near the rest stop.
I guess I just mentioned that as well because, as you know, Vermont has a billboard ban.
Yep.
And I would hate to see them line our,
Yeah.
interstate north and
right,
south just
but
to meet a
vistas,
goal.
The vistas are a lot different in Vermont than they are in eastern
that's true as
Massachusetts.
well.
Right. I mean, when I was coming here, just as I crossed the border from New Hampshire, I saw a couple of, for Vermont at least, larger solar installations just on the right there.
Oh, really?
Looking down,
Yep.
but I also saw swaths of forest cut away for transmission lines, and I think some of the infrastructure that seems jarring now isn't once it's been there a while and we're used to seeing it. We still want to protect the view shed, and I think that's a worthy goal. And I think that's one of the benefits of net energy metering is it tucks solar away where people are, not where people aren't. On places that are already developed rather than open fields.
Great. Thank you, Tim.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thanks for coming
Appreciate
out.
it.
It's nice to meet some of my colleagues to the north.
Yeah.
And
Very good.
if y'all are ever in Boston, swing by. In the Massachusetts State House, we get offices. So you can come to my
Offices?
office.
Wow, really?
Well, we're full year long.
Oh,
yeah.
yeah.
This is a real job.
I have a
Except
question for you.
the job.
I have a question.
Please.
So I heard you note in the first half of the state.
I'm sorry?
I heard you note in the first half of the state. Which half is that?
So from the Pike, the solar was installed from Boston going
That's what I
towards
figured.
the rural,
Yeah.
and by the time you get to the western half of the state, where the population density looks more like more of Vermont, I would say.
That's
Yeah.
the second half.
That's the second
The
half.
second half of the state.
You're in the third.
Boston is the hub. Boston is the hub of the universe, right? So that's how we perceive it. I don't see it very often. I don't even own a car, so for me, like,
Wow.
you know, the western half of Massachusetts might as well be Nebraska for how often I get there, which is, you know, once or twice a year. I had to get up bright and early this morning to the rental car place to get a car to come here.
Nice drive.
No complaints.
Not as bad as,
Thank
not as
you
nice
for
as
coming
yesterday.
out.
It's my pleasure.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.